Get him out of here! Now!
The champagne glass shattered before she even finished her sentence. Get him out of here now. Before someone posts a photo, that was my wife, 12 years married, screaming at a hotel ballroom full of people I'd never met, pointing at me like I was a stain on the carpet instead of the man she slept next to every night. I was standing in the doorway of the Ashford Grand Ballroom in a delivery uniform, grease on the cuffs, my name badge crooked, a brown package still tucked under my arm because I hadn't even had time to set it down. 300 people turned to look. Crystal chandeliers. A string quartet that didn't stop playing because rich people have learned not to react to anything that isn't their own tragedy. My wife's name is Vanessa, and in exactly 4 minutes, she was going to hand me divorce papers in front of every person she'd ever wanted to impress. But stay with me, because this story isn't about the papers. It's about what happened 90 seconds after she handed them to me. Let me back up just a little. Just enough for you to understand who was standing in that doorway, because it was not the man Vanessa thought she married. My name is Elias Whitfield. For 6 years, my wife believed I drove a delivery van for Meridian Express because I couldn't hold down anything better. She told her book club that. She told her sister that. She told the barista at the coffee shop she went to every single morning, loud enough for me to hear from the parking lot, that her husband was a sweet man, but not exactly going anywhere. What Vanessa did not know, what nobody in that ballroom knew, is that Meridian Express is mine. I built it. Every truck, every warehouse, every route optimization algorithm, every one of the 4,200 employees on payroll, mine. I don't drive a delivery van because I have to. I drive it because my father drove one for 31 years and never once complained, and because if I stop understanding what it feels like to carry other people's packages up 4 flights of stairs in the rain, I stop understanding the company I built. Respect isn't loud. I learned that from a man who never raised his voice in his life. I believe in quiet work, the kind nobody claps for, the kind that doesn't come with an audience. So when Vanessa stood in front of her friends, women with surnames that own hotels and shipping lines, the very families whose deals sat on my desk waiting for signature, and told them her husband delivers packages for a living, like it was something to be ashamed of, I didn't correct her. I let her have that. I let her have 6 years of it, because I wasn't married to Vanessa for her approval. I was married to her because 12 years ago, before any of this, before the company had a name, she used to bring me coffee at 4 in the morning when I was building spreadsheets on a card table in a 1-bedroom apartment with a broken radiator. I remember that woman. I have spent years looking for her in the person standing across that ballroom. Elias. Her voice cracked through the room like a whip. I want you to sign these, right here, right now, in front of everyone so there's no confusion about what kind of man you are. She held out a manila folder, divorce papers. She'd had them drawn up by a lawyer 3 weeks prior. I'd know, because I own the building the law firm rents its office in, and my assistant flags every unusual filing request that touches my name, out of habit, out of protection. I took the folder. I didn't open it, I just held it. And I looked at her, and for one single second, I saw the woman who used to bring me coffee. And then it was gone again, replaced by the woman who'd spent the last 2 years telling everyone I was a disappointment while she vacationed on money she told me was for medical recovery. Stay with me. That part's coming. The receipts are coming. Sign it, she said again, louder this time, because an audience makes people braver than they actually are. And that's when the doors at the far end of the ballroom opened. Marcus Webb walked in, 6'4", gray suit, the kind of posture that comes from 30 years in rooms where being wrong costs 9 figures. Marcus is the chief operating officer of Holloway Continental, the largest logistic conglomerate on the eastern seaboard, and as of 6 days ago, in the final stages of a merger with my company that would make Meridian Express the backbone of freight distribution for 11 states. He didn't look at Vanessa. He didn't look at her friends. He walked straight past the string quartet, straight past 300 stunned faces, and he stopped in front of me in my grease-stained uniform, my crooked name badge, the package still under my arm, and he bowed his head. Mr. Whitfield, I apologize for the intrusion. The board has been trying to reach you for 2 hours. They need your signature on the merger agreement before markets open in Tokyo. I was told you'd gone on a delivery route and might be reachable near this address. Silence, the kind of silence that has weight, the kind you can feel pressing against your eardrums. Sir, he said again, glancing just slightly at my uniform, at the package under my arm, with something between confusion and reverence. Why are you in the delivery van? I watched Vanessa's face change in real time. I watched 300 people recalculate everything they thought they understood about the man they just watched get humiliated. I watched her hand, the one holding the divorce papers, start to shake. I like driving the route, I told Marcus, calm, quiet, the way I always talk when something matters. Keeps me honest. I'll sign it in the car, give me 5 minutes. I turned back to Vanessa. She wasn't shaking with anger anymore. You were serving me papers, I said. Let's not let that get lost in the excitement. Her mouth opened. Nothing came out. Ilias. She finally managed. What is he talking about? What merger? The one that closes Thursday, I said. 41 billion. You'll read about it in the paper, probably. Should be good timing, actually. Right around when your lawyer files these. I held up the folder. I'll have my legal team review it tonight, I said. Might take them a while, though. They're a little busy. Same team handling the merger. Same team, incidentally, that flagged some unusual transfers out of the Meridian corporate account about 8 months ago. Ghost shipping contracts. We can talk about that later. Tonight's about you, though. Tonight's your night. Somebody in that crowd gasped. I didn't look to see who. Vanessa's friend, the one who'd been loudest about the aesthetic, took a full step back from her. Like proximity to Vanessa had suddenly become a liability rather than a status symbol. That's the thing about people who worship money. Their loyalty has the shelf life of the last thing they heard. I don't understand, Vanessa whispered. Just to me now. Just for me. I know, I said. That's kind of the whole problem, isn't it? I turned to leave. Marcus fell into step beside me, already pulling out his tablet with the merger documents. But before I reached the door, I stopped, because there was one more thing that needed saying, and I wasn't going to say it later, in private, where it would be easy for her to reshape it into something softer. Nothing about who I really am changed the day you found out what I owned, I said, loud enough for the room, not loud enough to be cruel. I was the same man yesterday. I was the same man 12 years ago on that card table with the broken radiator. You just weren't looking at me. You were looking at what you thought I was worth. I walked out into the parking lot. The delivery van was still running, hazards on, exactly where I'd left it 40 minutes earlier when I told the dispatcher I needed 20 minutes to handle something personal. I sat in the driver's seat. Marcus stood outside the window with his tablet, waiting patiently. Because that's what you do when you've worked for a man for 9 years, and you understand that some things take priority, even over a $41 billion merger. I signed the papers, not the merger, not yet. Vanessa's divorce, right there, dashboard as a desk. Pen borrowed from the glove box where I keep receipts for gas and toll roads, and the small paper coffee cups from gas stations along Route 9. The same route my father drove for 3 decades. The same route I still drive twice a month. Unannounced, because a man forgets who he is the moment he stops doing the work with his own hands. I signed my name, Elias Whitfield, same signature as the one on the merger documents Marcus was holding, same signature as the one on 4,200 paychecks that go out every other Friday. I folded the papers back into the envelope, and for the first time in longer than I want to admit, I felt something close to relief. Because the truth was, and stay with me here, because this is where the story really starts. I had already known for 11 months that this marriage was over. I'd known since the night I found a hotel receipt in a coat pocket that wasn't mine to find, from a resort 3 states away. Dated the same week Vanessa told me she was at a wellness retreat, recovering from what she called chronic exhaustion. I'd known since I traced $81,000 in recovery expenses to a joint account held by a man named Preston Cole. A name I recognized instantly, because Preston Cole ran a rival logistics firm that had spent the last 2 years trying, quietly and then not so quietly, to poach my biggest shipping contracts. I'd known, and I'd said nothing. Because respect isn't loud, because I don't do anything rash, Because my mother taught me, sitting on her porch with a cup of coffee going cold in her hands, the same porch my father built with his own hands the year before he died, that roots take time to grow, and a man who rips them out of the ground the second something threatens him has no roots at all. Roots take time, she told me. Your father built something slow, something real. He'd be proud of your patience, Elias, not your bank account. Your patience. So I waited. I built the case, quietly, the way I build everything. And that ballroom, that was never the beginning of anything. That was the ending of something I'd already spent 11 months preparing for. The receipts were already printed. The forensic accountant's report was already sitting in a locked drawer in my home office. The private investigator's photographs, time-stamped, dated, unambiguous, were already in a folder labeled with nothing but a date. Vanessa thought she was the one serving papers tonight. She had no idea what was in my glove box. Let me take you back further. Not to the ballroom, past it, back to where this actually started. Because if you only know the ending, you'll misunderstand everything about the man standing in that parking lot, signing his own divorce papers with a gas station pen. 12 years ago, I was 26 years old, living in a one-bedroom apartment above a laundromat in a part of the city where the rent was cheap because the pipes groaned all night and the radiator worked maybe half the winter. I had a business degree from a state school. Nobody name drops at cocktail parties. $11,000 in student debt and one asset in the entire world that meant anything to me. My father's truck, a 1974 Ford dark green, the paint gone matte with age, the seats patched with duct tape. My father had applied himself because he refused to pay someone else to do something he could do with his own two hands. He drove that truck for local deliveries for 31 years. Furniture, appliances, whatever needed hauling, until his heart gave out in the cab of it, parked outside a customer's house, engine still running, because that's the kind of man he was. Worked until the very last mile. That truck was the only thing he left me. Not money, not property. A truck with 211,000 miles on it, and a glove box full of faded receipts, the same habit I picked up without ever deciding to. Vanessa and I had been married 8 months when she came to me with an idea, a boutique. Women's clothing, curated, small batch, the kind of shop that does well in a neighborhood that's starting to gentrify. She had a business plan. She had a location picked out. She had everything except the $22,000 she needed for the build-out. And the first 6 months of inventory. I sold my father's truck. I didn't tell her what it cost me to do that. I didn't tell her I sat in the parking lot of the dealership for 40 minutes after signing the paperwork, because some part of me understood I was selling the last physical thing that connected me to him. I told her it was just a truck. I told her I was happy to do it. Both of those things were half true, which is its own kind of lie. The boutique opened. It did modestly well for the first year. And then, slowly the profits started disappearing into expenses Vanessa said were reinvestment. New fixtures, a rebrand, a website redesign that cost more than the initial build-out. I never questioned it. I was working 18-hour days by then, because the boutique wasn't the only thing I was building. While Vanessa ran her shop, I was quietly assembling what would become Meridian Express, starting with 2 vans and a contract to deliver auto parts to 3 garages on the east side of the city. I didn't tell her the scale of what I was building, not because I was hiding it maliciously, but because I wanted, for once in my life, to build something that wasn't shaped by anyone else's expectations. I wanted to know if I could do it on the strength of my own 2 hands, the way my father built everything he ever owned. By year 3, Meridian had 11 vans and a warehouse contract with a regional grocery chain. By year 5, we had our first logistics software patent and 43 employees. By year 7, Vanessa's boutique had quietly closed. She told people it was a strategic pivot, told me it was just not the right time in the market, and I had become, without most people noticing, one of the fastest growing regional freight companies on the coast. I kept driving routes. Every month, sometimes twice a month, I'd tell my executive team I needed a personal day, and I'd put on the same uniform every driver on my payroll wears, and I'd take out a van, and I'd deliver packages on Route 9. The same stretch of highway my father drove for 3 decades. People asked me why. My board asked me why. Even my mother asked me why once sitting on that porch with her coffee. Because the day I stop understanding what it feels like to carry someone's package up 4 flights of stairs in the rain, I told her, is the day I stop deserving to run a company that asks 4,000 people to do exactly that every single day for a paycheck that barely covers their rent. She nodded slowly. She didn't say anything for a long time. Then she said the thing I've thought about every day since. Your father never wanted to be loved for what he owned, Elias. He wanted to be loved for the man he was when nobody was looking. You understand the difference? I understood it. I've built my entire life around understanding it, which is exactly why I never told Vanessa the truth. I didn't need her to love an empire. I needed to know, the way you need to know the ground beneath your feet is solid before you build a house on it, that she loved the man in the uniform, grease on the cuffs, crooked name badge, nothing to offer but 18-hour days and quiet devotion. For the first 4 years of our marriage, I believed she did. Then, about 2 years ago, Vanessa started complaining of exhaustion, migraines, trouble sleeping. She saw doctors, real doctors, I confirmed that much, and one of them recommended a wellness retreat, a place specializing in stress recovery for what she called high-functioning burnout, even though she hadn't worked in over a year. The retreat cost $11,000 for a 2-week stay. I paid it without hesitation, because that's what you do for someone you love, and because, stay with me, this matters, I genuinely believed she was suffering. She went back 4 more times over the following 18 months. Each visit cost more than the last. Each time she came back saying she felt renewed, grounded like herself again, and each time within a month the exhaustion crept back in. I run a logistics company. I understand patterns. Patterns are the entire business, and something about the pattern of Vanessa's illness didn't fit the shape of an actual illness. Illness doesn't respond that predictably to a change of scenery. Illness doesn't come with a tan. I hired someone, not because I wanted to catch her. I want to be honest with you about that, because there's a version of this story where I tell you I suspected betrayal from the start, and that version isn't true. I hired a private investigator because I was worried, genuinely worried. I thought maybe there was something else going on, a medical condition she wasn't telling me about. Something more serious than burnout, and I wanted to understand it so I could help her properly. What came back 11 days later was a manila folder that I still keep in a locked drawer in my home office. Photographs, time-stamped. A resort in the mountains one Vanessa had told me was a silent meditation retreat with no phone access. Except the photographs showed her at a rooftop bar with a cocktail in her hand, laughing, wearing a dress I recognized, because I'd seen the credit card charge for it 3 weeks earlier. And beside her in every photograph, the same man, Preston Cole. I knew the name before I knew the face. Preston Cole ran Halcyon Freight, a logistics company, half the size of mine, that had spent the better part of 2 years trying to undercut my contracts, poach my drivers, and, on one occasion I'd only recently confirmed, plant a false safety complaint against Meridian with a regional trade board. A complaint that took my legal team 4 months and considerable expense to disprove. I sat in my home office with that folder for 3 hours the night I first opened it. I didn't call Vanessa. I didn't confront her. I sat there and I thought about my father, parked in his truck on his last delivery, engine still running, and I thought about the kind of man who reacts and the kind of man who builds a case, and I decided quietly, the way I decide everything, that I was going to find out exactly how deep this went before I said a single word. That decision is the reason the middle of this story exists. That decision is the reason I have almost a year's worth of receipts. Stay with me, because it gets worse before it gets better. The forensic accountant I hired, the same one who audits Meridian's books twice a year, found something I wasn't expecting. It wasn't just an affair. Preston Cole had been running what's called a ghost shipping scheme against my own company for over 2 years. Fake shipping manifests, invoices for freight that never existed, routed through a shell logistics broker, paid out of a discretionary vendor account that one of my former regional managers, a man named Doyle Renner, who I'd promoted twice and trusted enough to let approve vendor payments without a second signature, had been quietly authorizing $216,000 over 26 months, split, according to the account records my accountant traced, almost exactly down the middle between Preston Cole's shell company and a joint account under two names, Vanessa Whitfield and Preston Cole. Vanessa's boutique hadn't just quietly closed because it wasn't the right time in the market. She had shut it down entirely, then quietly reopened its business license under a different name, using it as the receiving entity for a portion of the laundered funds. My wife wasn't just having an affair. My wife was laundering embezzled money from my own company through a shell version of the same failed business I'd sold my father's truck to fund. I remember exactly where I was when the accountant explained this to me. I was standing in the loading bay of our central warehouse at 5 in the morning, coffee going cold in my hand, watching the night shift finish their routes, and the day shift arrive to take over, the actual heartbeat of the company I'd built from 2 vans and a card table. And I felt something in my chest that I can only describe as the floor of a house giving out from beneath you slowly, one board at a time instead of all at once. I didn't cry. I want to be honest about that too, because there's a version of this story where the hero breaks down, and that's not what happened. What happened is I finished my coffee. I thanked the accountant. I told him to keep digging quietly and to loop in outside counsel the following week. And then I drove a delivery route that same day, because some days, the only thing that keeps a man upright is doing the work with his own 2 hands. I called my mother that weekend. I didn't tell her everything. Some things a son doesn't need to put on his mother's shoulders, but I told her enough. I told her I'd found out Vanessa had been unfaithful, and that there was money involved, and that I didn't know what to do with the anger sitting in my chest like a stone I couldn't swallow or spit out. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said the thing that changed the shape of the rest of this story. "Your father used to say something to me back when we had nothing," she said. "He said patience isn't the absence of anger, Elias. Patience is anger with a plan. You go build your plan. Don't burn the house down in one night just because you finally have the matches." I sat with that for a long time. Patience isn't the absence of anger. It's anger with a plan. So I built a plan. Over the following 8 months, quietly, without a single confrontation, without a single raised voice, I built a case that would eventually walk into that ballroom with me in a delivery uniform and a manila folder of my own. I documented every fraudulent invoice. I traced every dollar of the embezzlement back through Doyle Renner's approvals to Preston Cole's shell company, to the joint account with Vanessa's name on it. I had outside counsel prepare, quietly, a civil fraud suit against both Preston and Doyle, ready to file the moment I gave the word. I had my forensic accountant prepare a full report suitable for both the civil suit and, if it came to that, a criminal referral to the district attorney's economic crimes unit. And I let Vanessa believe, every single day of those 8 months, that nothing had changed. I let her go to her wellness retreats. I let her spend money that was never really hers to spend. I let her tell her friends her husband was a disappointment. Because every ounce of humiliation she handed me in public was one more piece of evidence, in my mind, that she had absolutely no idea who she actually married. And I intended, when the moment came for that gap between her assumption and the truth, to be the thing that finally broke her composure. Not money, not anger, just the plain unbearable weight of realizing she never actually knew the man standing in front of her. I want to pause here and ask you something, because I've thought about this a lot, and I think it says something about who you are listening to this. If you were in my shoes, the moment you found those hotel receipts, the moment you understood your wife was in a joint account with a man actively defrauding your own company, would you have crashed her boutique the next morning and confronted her on the spot? Or would you have done what I did? Stayed quiet, built the case, made it bulletproof, and let the truth arrive on your own terms, in your own time. Team confront or team build? Tell me in the comments. I'm genuinely curious which one of you would have lasted 8 months. Because I almost didn't. There were nights I sat in my car outside that resort 3 states away, engine off, just watching the entrance, wondering if I had the discipline my father had. wondering if patience really was a virtue or just a slower kind of cowardice. But then I'd think about Route 9, about the way my father used to say that anybody can lose their temper, that losing your temper is free. It costs nothing, and it buys you nothing either. Building something that lasts costs you everything you've got, including your pride, including your right to be angry out loud whenever you feel like it. So I stayed quiet. And by the time Vanessa handed me those divorce papers in front of 300 people, thinking she was the one holding all the power in that room, I already knew something she did. I already knew that 6 days before that gala, my legal team had filed the civil fraud complaint against Preston Cole and Doyle Renner, sealed pending service. I already knew the district attorney's economic crimes unit had opened a preliminary file based on my accountant's report. I already knew that the $41 billion merger with Holloway Continental, the one Marcus Webb walked into that ballroom to remind me about, included a clause my legal team had quietly inserted 11 weeks earlier, one that would automatically terminate Halcyon Freight's remaining shipping contracts the moment fraud charges were formally filed against its president. Vanessa thought she was ending a marriage that night. She had no idea she was about to watch her lover's entire company collapse in the same week. The papers were filed on a Tuesday. I remember because Tuesday is the day I drive Route 9. And I was 3 deliveries into my morning when my phone buzzed with a message from outside counsel. Service completed. Cole and Renner both served this morning. DA's office confirms preliminary criminal file opened. Press office has no comment prepared. Recommend having one ready. I finished my route. I always finish my route. By that evening, it was everywhere. Not because I leaked it. I want to be clear about that. I never once spoke to a reporter. But because Preston Cole's company was publicly traded on a minor regional exchange, and a fraud filing against a sitting CEO is the kind of thing that moves a stock price within hours. Halcyon Freight dropped 34% before markets closed. 2 of their largest remaining shipping contracts, the ones they'd stolen from smaller companies over the past 2 years, using the same ghost invoice scheme they'd run against me, were suspended pending investigation by the following morning. Preston Cole's lawyer released a statement calling the allegations categorically false and politically motivated, which is an interesting thing to say about a civil fraud suit filed by a private citizen with no political office. But I suppose panic makes people say strange things. Vanessa called me 41 times in 6 days. I didn't answer. Not out of cruelty. I want to be honest with you about that too. But because I genuinely had nothing to say to her that wasn't already sitting in a legal filing with both our names attached to different sections of it. Some conversations aren't conversations anymore. They're just depositions with better lighting. She showed up at my office on the 7th day. Not the executive office at Meridian headquarters. She didn't know that one existed because I'd never brought her there. Because some part of me, even in the good years, had kept one door closed. She showed up at the small operations office near the central warehouse, the one where I actually spend most of my time, the one with a metal desk and a coffee maker that's older than some of our delivery vans. She looked different than she had in the ballroom, smaller, somehow, in a way that had nothing to do with her actual size. I need to understand what's happening, she said. My lawyer says I might be named in the fraud case. He says my name is on an account. It is, I said. Elia's. I didn't know what Preston was doing with that money. I swear to you, I had no idea. I looked at her for a long moment. I want you to understand, I wasn't angry in that moment. The anger had burned itself down to something quieter over the 8 months I'd spent building the case. The way a fire eventually stops being flame and just becomes heat sitting in the coals. What I felt looking at her wasn't rage. It was something closer to grief for a version of her I used to know, a version I wasn't sure had ever really existed or if I just needed her to. The account has your name on it because you opened it, I said. The bank has your signature on file. 3 separate wire transfers went through with your authorization code. I'm not asking you to explain it to me, Vanessa. I'm telling you what the forensic accountant found, because you're going to hear it from a prosecutor soon enough. And I'd rather you hear it from me first. She sat down across from that old metal desk. She didn't say anything for a long time. Did you know? She finally asked. The whole time? About Preston? 11 months, I said. Her face did something I'll remember for a long time. Not shock, because I think some part of her had already suspected I knew. It was closer to the look of someone recalculating an entire timeline in real time, replaying every conversation, every dinner, every night I'd come home from a long delivery shift and said nothing, wondering how much of it had been performance, and how much had simply been a man giving her room to either come clean or dig herself deeper. You let me keep going, she said. You let me humiliate you, in front of everyone, at the gala. You knew what you owned this whole time, and you let me stand there and tell people you were nothing. I let you show me who you were, I said. That's different than letting you humiliate me. I was never small in that room, Vanessa. You were the one who needed an audience to feel powerful. I've never needed one. She started crying then. I didn't comfort her. I want to be honest about that, because there's version of this story where the hero softens at the sight of his wife's tears. And I understand why audiences want that version. But comfort, in that moment, would have been its own kind of lie, a suggestion that we were still two people capable of comforting each other, when the truth was we'd stopped being that a long time before either of us said it out loud. What happens now? She asked. Now you talk to your lawyer, I said. Now the DA's office decides whether you're a co-conspirator or a person who benefited from a fraud you didn't orchestrate. That's not my decision to make, and honestly, it's not really yours either anymore. That decision belongs to people with a badge and a case file. And us? I almost laughed, not out of cruelty, but out of the plain absurdity of the question. There was no us left to discuss. There hadn't been an us in any real sense for at least 2 years, maybe longer. Maybe since the moment the boutique failed and she'd started measuring her worth against something I'd never asked her to measure it against. I already signed the papers, I said, in the parking lot that night. She left without saying anything else. I watched her walk out of that operations office into a parking lot full of delivery vans, past drivers loading packages for their afternoon routes, and I thought about how strange it was that she'd spent 6 years believing that world was beneath her, right up until the moment it turned out to be the only thing solid enough to still be standing. The divorce was finalized 11 weeks later. Vanessa was not named as a criminal co-defendant. The DA's office determined, after months of investigation, that while she'd benefited from the laundered funds, the evidence didn't clearly establish she'd known the source of the money at the time the joint account was opened, only that she'd continued accepting deposits into it for well over a year after any reasonable person would have started asking questions. No charges, but no denial either in the plain language of the settlement, which is its own kind of verdict if you know how to read it. Preston Cole was not so fortunate. The criminal case moved faster than anyone expected, partly because Doyle Renner, the regional manager who'd approved the fraudulent vendor payments, flipped almost immediately, providing detailed testimony and internal Meridian records in exchange for a reduced sentence. Preston Cole was convicted on 11 counts of wire fraud and 1 count of securities fraud related to material misstatements he'd made to Halcyon Freight's shareholders about the company's contract, Pipeline. He's currently serving a sentence at a federal facility upstate. Halcyon Freight no longer exists. Its remaining assets were acquired, in a strange twist even I didn't orchestrate, by a mid-sized competitor during the bankruptcy proceedings. A competitor that, 6 months later, entered into a supply agreement with Meridian Express, meaning some of Preston Cole's former drivers now deliver packages using routes optimized by software my company built. I think about that sometimes. How thoroughly the universe seems to enjoy irony when you give it enough time to work. Doyle Renner was terminated, obviously, and pled guilty to a lesser fraud charge. He's currently completing probation, and according to people who still work at Meridian, driving for a rideshare company to make ends meet. I don't feel triumphant about that. I want to be honest with you. There's no satisfaction in watching a man who once had a good job lose everything, even when he earned the loss himself. I think my father would have told me the same thing. Justice isn't supposed to feel like a party. It's supposed to feel like weight being set down correctly, in the right place after being carried wrong for too long. The merger with Holloway Continental closed on schedule. Meridian Express is now, as of this year, the largest freight and logistics operator on the eastern seaboard, employing just over 9,000 people across 14 states. I still drive Route 9 twice a month. Nobody stops me anymore. Most of the newer drivers don't even know who I am when I show up in the uniform. They just think I'm the quiet older guy who never talks much and always tips himself out of his own pocket at the coffee stand near mile marker 40. I like it that way. My mother came to visit last month. We sat on that same porch, the one my father built with his own hands the year before he passed, and she asked me, the way she always asks, gently, like she already suspects the answer, whether I was happy. I told her I was something closer to settled. Happy felt like too small a word, and also too large a one, for what it actually feels like to have built something honest out of something that started as a lie you told yourself you weren't telling. Your father would be proud of you, she said. Not for the company. He never would have cared much about the company, if I'm honest. He'd be proud of the years you spent not saying anything. That's the hardest thing in the world to do, and you did it right. I believe her. I think patience really is the thing that separates a man who builds something that lasts from a man who just wins an argument and calls it a legacy. There's a version of this story that ends with fireworks. A villain publicly destroyed, a hero vindicated in front of a cheering crowd, cathartic and loud and satisfying in the way revenge fantasies are supposed to be satisfying. That's not quite what happened, and I think it's important to tell you the truth instead of the more exciting version. What actually happened is quieter than that. Vanessa moved 3 states away. I heard, secondhand, through a mutual acquaintance, that she works retail now, something in a mall. Something with an hourly wage and a name tag not unlike the crooked one I wore into that ballroom the night everything changed. I don't know if that's true. I haven't checked. Some information isn't mine to go looking for anymore. The unbearable thing for her, I suspect, the thing that actually broke something in her, more than the divorce, more than the financial settlement, more than watching Preston Cole go to prison, was never the money. It was the realization, slow and complete, that she had spent 6 years mocking a man she had never actually known. That every dinner where she made a small comment about his dead-end job in front of friends, every eye roll at his uniform, every moment she chose an audience's approval over her own husband's dignity, had been aimed at a target that didn't exist. She wasn't tearing down the man who built an empire. She was tearing down her own idea of him, built entirely out of what she assumed his lack of ambition meant about his worth. That's the part that stays with people, I think. Not the money lost. The plain, unbearable weight of realizing you never actually knew the person standing in front of you because you were too busy deciding what they were worth to bother finding out who they actually were. So here's my homework for you, and I mean this more than I've meant almost anything I've said in this video. I'm not going to ask you to like this video or subscribe or hit the notification bell. You know how to do that already. And if the story was worth your time, you'll do it without me asking. Instead, I want you to call somebody. Tonight, if you can. A father, an uncle, a cousin. Somebody in your life who works with their hands, who drives a truck or stocks a warehouse or delivers packages in the rain. Somebody whose job you've maybe, at some point, quietly considered smaller than your own. Call them. Tell them you're proud of them. Explain why. Don't make it a whole conversation. Just say it, and let them sit with it, because most people who do that kind of work go their whole lives without hearing it said out loud, and it costs you nothing to be the person who finally says it. And if there's nobody like that to call, if that person was you, if you're the one who's spent years driving the route, doing the quiet work nobody claps for, wondering if it will ever add up to anything anyone respects, then do this instead. Brew a pot of coffee, sit with it in silence for 10 minutes, no phone.